Okay, you're going live now. Okay?
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Street Level Photo X close-up event with Dundee-based artist Sekai Machache. I'm Arpita Shah, and I've had the pleasure of working with Sekai for the past few years through the FOCAS Body of Land exhibition, which was actually meant to take place at Street Level Photo X right about now as part of Glasgow International. I think Sekai, we actually had a talk scheduled around this time with Sekai and our other artist, our Oyango, which was going to be led by the lovely Alberta Whittle. All of this is in the process of being rescheduled to another date. At Street Level Photo X in 2021. So watch this space, and we're very excited about it. When you showed your Shavi, the work of a young, emerging Black Scottish female artist working with photography in a gallery in Edinburgh. Obviously, since then, as it showed in your bio, you've been really busy. You just recently premiered your new series, Divine Skies, at Stills Gallery online as part of their Projects 20. This is going to be shown in physical form at Stills Gallery in the following months to come, which we're all really looking forward to. Last year, you were commissioned by Spitalfields and also exhibited your work in Brazil with British Council Scotland. You've got 2 upcoming shows in Glasgow next year, 1 in Addis Ababa, and you also recently published some of your work in Studies Photography and Notes Journal. So you've been really busy, but going back to 2015 and this series, Mashavi, I think this is a really important series and great introduction to your practice, as it seems to have really shaped the style, direction, and tone of your image making and the genre you work in. Your photographs they almost act as portals into the spiritual and subconscious. They're autobiographical, yet also universal in terms of exploring discourses and identity politics around the Black female body. For audience members who may not be familiar with this series, could you introduce the series to us?
Thank you so much, Arpita, first of all. I am going to very quickly share my screen so that people can see the images, and then I can start discussing the Shavi a little bit. It works. Is that okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So yes, the Mashavi series was made during my master's course at Duncan O'Jordanson College of Art in Dundee in 2015. I was on the Masters of Fine Art and Humanities course, and at the time I was thinking about a few different things. I just finished my undergrad and went straight into masters, and I was still kind of mulling over my dissertation that I wrote for my undergrad. And basically this work kind of almost acted as a visual representation of that dissertation, which was about me trying to kind of establish my position as a Black woman artist in the position, you know, within the wider context of the art world. And I was also thinking about what happens when artists of colour kind of put themselves in the frame and kind of resisting the white gaze in a sense with the work as well. So I'm kind of like thinking about lots of different things, and certain aspects of the images are kind of more significant than maybe people would see at first glance. Like, for example, the books that are on the table, which are basically books that I started to look at when I was looking at contemporary African art as a kind of a space that I could potentially inhabit as an artist myself. I'm also referencing something of my own culture from Zimbabwe, because I'm of Zimbabwean descent and I am Shona. And the concept of a Shavi is like a kind of a spirit or a wandering spirit that guides and also potentially acts as a kind of trickster in someone's life, and they can kind of impart knowledge or give gifts of like or certain talents to the person that they work with. So I was kind of embodying both myself as a student who's thinking about their position and thinking about what it means to make art as an artist of colour, as a Black woman artist. And I was also thinking about this concept of a kind of a guide that's always with me. There's another image here from the series. And I'm embodying both at the same time. I find it quite funny because sometimes people don't realise that it's me in both images, both of the characters. But I think it's quite playful, but then also it's kind of expressing quite a lot at the same time. And you saw the work the first time at the Jill Todd's exhibition at Stills in the same year in 2015. So don't know if you want to say like how you felt about the work when you saw it, or what might be.
Yeah, I mean, seeing it was really refreshing for me. Obviously, I've been living in Scotland for around 18 years, and actually, you know, there's a lot of conversations which I hope we'll talk about later on in terms of how much work is represented, you know, by artists of color, who represents that work, and you know, the kind of opportunities around that. So, I really did. It blew me away seeing the work, and you know, it blew me away so much that I contacted you sort of the following year and was very keen to work with you. Just because I suppose we've talked about this before, but you know, there's a legendary Maud Salter, really, in terms of iconic Black Scottish artists, for all sort of photographers to reference and get inspired from. But after that, there is, you know, there have been pockets of really inspiring artists, but not showcased that much. All of that's changing now, which is amazing. But you know, yeah, seeing that back in 2015, it was really blew me away, which is why I had to come and invite you to get involved with FOCAS and get you to make some more really exciting work. In terms of your series, Machache, and your other projects, you often feature in all your images with symbolic props, with fabrics, body paints, and artists like Maud Salter, Zanelli Moholi, Rotima Fani Coyote. They conjure up in my mind. So can you talk a little bit more about this interest in self-portraiture, you know, how it stemmed, where it stemmed, and also the process of being both photographer and sitter, because your setups are quite elaborate, as the audiences will see in the other works. They are quite elaborate setups with lighting and props. So can you talk about, that a bit more?
Yeah, so using myself as a model has been something that I've done for years, because when I was young, I used to actually just do that as something, it's just a pastime. I loved playing with body paints, and when I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time on my own in my room, just putting body paint on, putting makeup on, doing my hair in all these elaborate ways, and then taking images of it. Way before selfies were a thing, back in the MySpace days. And so it was just something that I did for fun. And then I remember being kind of a permanent fixture of the art department in my school. Like when I should have probably been in other places, I was always there. And I remember my art teacher like kind of seeing these images, and he basically said to me, "Oh, you do realize that this is art that you're making as well." And he encouraged me to look at Cindy Sherman's work, and from that point on, from the moment I saw her work, I realized that I was making art, and I actually had it was like something that I could build on. And then when I decided to go to art school, I remember a few years in, I looked at Kara James Marshall's work, and because I was really interested in painting, I'd always wanted to paint. So I was taking these images, but I was always insisting that I was going to paint from them. But my art tutors would say that you've made the work is there, and you don't necessarily need to paint the actual image, but it was something that was really important to me. So I was looking at Kara James Marshall as another inspiration. And he said when he was really young that he had this like motive to only use Black bodies in his work. because he wanted to show that Black bodies can convey universal human experiences. And that really resonated with me. So I basically refused to ever use white bodies in my work or to work with my images without using the Black body. So for me, unfortunately, I felt very isolated, and I was the only Black person I knew. So naturally, I became almost like a permanent sort of fixture in the frame of my images. And yeah, I also felt a little bit uncomfortable with asking someone else to step into the frame, especially with my understanding of how their body might be read by a white audience as well. And the responsibility of doing so is like still quite difficult for me, and I always try to do that with care. I wouldn't really describe, it's weird because I wouldn't describe my work as like self-portraits per se. I feel like I kind of I'm embodying concepts, and some of those concepts are pertaining to things that relate to myself and things that are happening to me or things I'm thinking about. But like you say, they are also kind of a universal thing as well.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting, yeah, especially when you talked about how you wanted to be a painter, because your photographs to me look so much like paintings, and I think the way you compose them and light them, they're almost like sculptures or paintings. So it's really interesting, the process of you working from painting to photography, and really the photographs are the paintings, which is really interesting. After Machache, you developed a series titled Musoro, where you used your own body and braided hair to explore loss, grief, and healing. Yeah. Could you share some images from this body of work? And it'd be great to kind of discuss that next.
Yeah, so this is these are some images from the Musoro series. And yeah, Musoro was made in early 2016, and it was a few months after my father had passed away. And I was really struggling to sort of move at the time. Even sort of getting out of bed was quite difficult, and I was also working a job that I found like really, really stressful and demanding, and had like very little energy. So I was kind of thinking about how my body was feeling, which was like just very still and constrained in some ways. And I was also in the process of reapplying to the Jill Todd Award for another year, and I was like, okay, I need to find some energy from somewhere to make this work. So I kind of quite intuitively started working with hair because in the process of braiding. And the reason being was that when I was doing my master's work for the Machache project, I was actually making another series called Braiding Across a Room. And that was a year-long project. That was where I was braiding across a room in my house, like every single day, like several times a day, until I had lengths and lengths and lengths of braided hair. And then at my degree show, I actually, alongside the Machache work, I showed the series of which is called Braiding Across a Room. It was a 10-meter long room, and the braids kind of almost separated, like created a meridian line or division line between the two different Machache images on either side. And yeah, so I'd been kind of in this process of braiding for a long time, and then I just had this long period where I couldn't make anything at all. And so I mustered up the energy because I was applying for the Jill Todd Award anyway. So I started braiding my own hair instead of braiding like, you know, outside of myself. I braided onto my own hair. And as you can see in the images, the hair is like covering most of my body. Mm-hmm. And I kind of kept on thinking about this idea of obscuring the face, obscuring the head. And Musoro is another Shona word, which Musoro means head, but there's this other kind of more poetic understanding of it as being something about like an obscure covering of the head. So I was working with that representation, and then also just the actual process of braiding my hair for the first time ever, and doing it so long, and putting all and making it so kind of ornamental and sculptural. And then I started to think, you know, something else is missing here. There's another braid that needs to exist in this frame as well. So I started working with red, and you'll see red kind of appearing as a motif in the work from probably Masaru onwards. It popped up a wee bit in Machache, but not like as predominantly as it does after that. So yeah, the braids in Masaru kind of becomes a kind of, it's a tool or a symbolic tool in a way, and I'm trying to tell a story without actually giving too much away about what the story is. So you can see in the images that there's something symbolic, something poetic, or kind of not quite descriptive. And then the other images where the braid isn't present, it's really just about the body and how restricted and how still the body has to be while it's trying to process such a loss. Frozen.
Thank you. I really, really love this body of work. And what I find really fascinating is when you actually write about your work, you don't often reveal too much or sort of explain or inform the viewer sort of about, you know, what the word means, that, you know, what the story means. It's quite poetic. It's more poetic than literal. And for me as a viewer, when I'm looking at your images, it's like more about this experience of entering this otherworldly, private, internal space of yours, and sort of navigating around it, trying to sort of make sense of it, but knowing it's something deeply personal that maybe I'm not going to understand, and not that you're trying to explain to me. So it's a really interesting dynamic. In the past, you've discussed photography inhibiting a space for self-healing, which art often does, you know, for artists and audiences. So I'm really curious to know, as part of your process, when you're making work, that sometimes might not be as accessible in terms of like the language of the title to wider audiences. Do you think about your viewers, you know, and what you hope they take from your work during your creative process? Or is it very much, you know, you kind of do this intuitive, rhythmic, therapeutic process of making your work, and then you put it out there, and, you know, the audience, the thought of the audience interacting with it doesn't really, it's not part of your creative process. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's an interesting one, because it's like, I think as a visual artist, it would be remiss of me to not think of the viewer, but
Right.
As an artist who is also gendered and racialized, and who is often putting my own body or like the body of another Black woman in the frame, the viewer's gaze can also be problematic, especially when we're living in a predominantly white culture. So I make my work intuitively, and I'm playing with form and color, and there's always a feeling I'm trying to put across. So it's less about what's seen, but more about what is felt by the viewer when they see the image. I feel that an image is complete when I sense that there is something like almost uncanny. There's like an uncanny knowing that is that might be ignited in someone else upon looking at it. So I think obviously with a series like Masaru, it's not really about my body or even the braid. It's not that's not what's important. It's like what they might symbolize for someone else. And yeah, so I was thinking a lot about this with all of my series actually, that I think they're not referential. They're kind of more about how you feel, because it's actually how I feel. I'm almost like giving that over in a way, which is quite vulnerable, but at the same time, I kind of hold back enough so that it's not too painful, I guess. I think it's
I think the next series we're thinking of feels very universal to me, like in terms of universal. Is it all right? Okay, yeah, I'll start again. So next project we're moving on to is Indication. Oh, there we go. Sorry, you're jumping. Yeah, for me there feels a shift from the autobiographical to something more universal and political in this body of your work. Your images continue with this recurrence of red and blacks in Invocation, like you did in Misoro, but they're darker in visual tone, and they almost feel like religious sculptures, and they seem to reference more world cultures and philosophies. So I'm going to pass it on to you so everyone can hear you talk about this really beautiful work.
Yeah, Invocation is a really interesting series because it just keeps getting more and more, gets bigger and bigger every time it's viewed, if you get what I mean. Again, I was applying for an award. I wasn't really necessarily thinking about like what the grand idea was. It was just, I felt, I remember having this kind of image in my head and kind of following that image towards this final series. And it was kind of doing two or three different things at the same time. I was, in a sense, trying to represent an idea that is much, much, much larger than me, much, much larger than any of us. And that was representing the Hindu goddess Kali in some capacity. It's not referencing her, but rather the notion and the energy that she embodies, which is basically very like the primordial energy. And I don't know how to describe it any kind of more than that without getting into like metaphysics and stuff. So I remember like that image coming to me and then feeling like I needed to work with it. And I was also thinking about the ways that as a dark-skinned Black woman and as like a Black person in general, there's this idea that we're supposed to be extremely strong and with basically be able to withstand like any kind of pressure, pain or stress, and just keep going, keep powering on. And I feel like this sense of exhaustion with that that kind of societal pressure to do that. And also the representations that we see of Black women, especially dark-skinned Black women, have been very limiting in that way as well. So I was kind of trying to pull together an understanding of how Kali's image has been misrepresented by people, scholars in the West, who were misunderstanding what she actually means in Hinduism. And then I was also pulling that together with this idea about Black women being misrepresented. And I just kind of brought them together and then created the series where I'm working with black and red. And there's white in there as well with the way that the light kind of creates these halo effects in the background. And also working with the mudras as well to kind of express like something about being in a meditative state, invoking the energy of something much larger than you to express something that's universal for all of us. And yeah, so I felt like this was the first time that I created something that really resonated with a lot of people. And I was quite lucky that after making it, I was invited to show the work in Brazil. And this is some images from the exhibition that I had at the Institute Moreira Salles, in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 2018. And yeah, this is me at a talk there as well. So yeah, it's had a lot of traction. It's been in the photography and notes journal and a few other publications as well.
They're incredibly striking portraits, and what I really love about the work is the sort of tenderness, power and vulnerabilities actually through the hands and the humanity, like how you're sort of using the hands and expressions of the hands. It's really, really powerful. In terms of the significance of the red, and like just red seems to be like a reoccurring theme in all your, recurrent color in all your images. Can you talk a little bit about the red hands and
I'll go back to the first slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, so red has been like the simplest and most boring answer is that it was my favorite color for most of my life. And so that seems quite innocuous. Everyone has a favorite color. But I started to notice something about it. I started to notice that like certain people wear red. And if you pay attention to that and pay attention to what kind of energy those people have or how we move through the world, you start to notice that there's something going on there. Well, I did anyway. So it's like, why am I wearing red all the time? What am I trying to work through potentially? The initial thing is to look at color theory and just be like, okay, well, red means this, this, this. But then there's also these cultural and spiritual ideas related to the color as well. And I looked into what that might be in lots of different cultures. And from my understanding, it's almost like black, red, and white are like the first colors that people could ever recognized or ever named or ever kind of tried to express. So they're almost like represent the first energy that you work with if you're trying to make some sort of connection to something outside of yourself or something deeper within yourself as well. So we look at like the chakra system, the root chakra is red, and all the significances of that in relation to like having a strong foundation, understanding self. And so, yeah, it was red, sometimes blue, sometimes purple. These colors would always kind of find their way in my life, on my body, or and I would very rarely, like every now and again, green pops up, but it's very rare. Like, so like you can see right now I'm wearing green. It's really just not like something that happens very often. But I always think about that, like, why is that your favorite color? Maybe it's something that is, it's almost like a little bit of an intuitive message that you're yourself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, of course, that you keep sort of working in your images. Invocation and what you said earlier on when we were talking about Mishavi and Misora, your work kind of raises really interesting wider questions around the representation of people of color and who controls their narratives. And there's a lot of discussions happening, long overdue discussions happening around that at the moment, you know, around the role of the photographer, you know, the accountability of the photographer, the role of the photo editor, the publisher, the gallery, the institution, you know, in terms of who controls the narratives of people of color and discourses around that. Do you have any thoughts sort of around that you want to sort of talk about?
Yeah, I think like what I was saying earlier about like the responsibility and asking someone else to model from my work is it's an intense one, especially when I'm using this black color on my skin and I'm asking someone else to step into the frame and potentially use these colors on their skin as well. And it's like about how do you feel about that? Like what are all the different connotations of that for any individual person? And then also how is it then like how does the gaze of the audience then affect that as well? So I kind of think about that for myself, and because I've had to do that so many times over, I mean, sometimes it's very, very difficult because the work is also personal. But then I'm thinking like when someone else is in the frame, I also have to like work with them to make the image, to construct the image in a way that doesn't become, I don't know what the word is, but almost like placing them in the space of a trauma or an idea that is difficult for me to work through. So I try my best to only work with other people in the work when it's really quite, when the ideas are not as difficult, if you get what I mean. I don't know how to.
No, that makes sense.
But then thinking about like how, like, you know, within the wider like scope of institutions and organizations and all of that, I mean, the black figure has been kind of almost, it's widely proliferated in media at the moment. In in many places it can be, we've gone from having zero representation to our faces are everywhere. And that can be kind of a bit strange as well, because it's like this redress, but the redress doesn't seem to actually ever happen unless there's profit that could be gained from it. And then we've also got, on the flip side of that, we've also got images of Black bodies in distress and pain and that we're constantly being inflicted with as well. So it's a very difficult time right now, because I'm getting to see lots more Black people you know, on billboards and all of that stuff, and that's amazing. But I'm also having to dodge images of Black people being killed and things like that as well. So it's almost it's just a very overwhelming time that we're living in. But my way around that, my kind of way of coping, is I follow Black people on all my socials, and so I get to see a lot of Black joy as well. I get to see Black people presenting themselves in the frame, making videos on TikTok and like Instagram, and like just being fully in control of their image. So that's I guess the antidote for me. Like, it's not just about what's in the gallery or what's in publications. It's also about what we're producing and what we're showing the world about who we are. Long answer.
No, that's a really great answer. I'm going to jump to sort of one of the questions. We kind of briefly talked about this last week when we were catching up, but sort of in terms of, you know, yeah, with recent discourses around Black Lives Matter, there have been a lot of institutions sort of sharing Black boxes and statements around sort of decolonizing the arts. And, you know, it's really interesting, as we both said, well, for me as well, just to kind of see, you know, the kind of statements that are being made. And I'm really eager to see like the long-term changes that would happen in these institutions, you know, the breakdown of power structures and sort of how that happens. But being, you know, a young Black artist, you must, how do you navigate around new institutions sort of getting in touch with you, wanting to, you know, show your work? And, you know, do you, you know, I personally feel conflicted sometimes on intention and representation, and just how do you navigate around that?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to navigate, because like on one hand there's been like potentially more opportunities available for me and my peers, but at the same time we're like well aware of the fact that many institutions could potentially be instrumentalizing us in order to make their organization look like they're doing the work, especially if they like they don't have a track record of supporting Black artists and other marginalized groups in their past or even recent past. And I believe that like we have a very long way to go regarding the process of decolonizing our institutions, and because they are not built to be inclusive in the first place and never have been, that there's just a lot of work that has to be done. And obviously the main thing is that we need to see more Black people, more marginalized groups represented in boardrooms and in decision making. You know, the gatekeepers of these institutions or of these industries kind of have to give up some space and let there be more people who might otherwise never even see those spaces. Yeah, so I think, and another thing as well is like being an artist and a Black woman artist, I have to play several roles. I don't get to just be an artist and just make. I also have to organize and build community and create a sustainable system for the next generation, because I can't have it be like it was for me, where I had Maud Salter and she's incredible. I love her, but it was like that was all there was, and I couldn't see anyone else. And now it's just us like having to excavate and find each other, and then also archiving and working together to make sure that there's a lasting presence and lasting representation, so that the next generation don't have it as hard. Yeah, so it's our work as well. It's everyone's work.
That's true. Thank you. That was really good to hear you say that, and I absolutely agree. I'm keeping an eye on the time because we have one more project which Sekai is going to be sharing, which is really exciting. So this is a new series of work called Ritual Manifestations, which was going to take part this year as part of the Body of Land exhibition at street level, but it's going to take place at street level in 2021. Body of Land's been a 3-year-long sort of project with Sekai and artist Awara Yongo. I'll pass it on to Sekai to talk about. I think this is the first time you're sharing wider images from this work and talking about it. And it's one of your larger bodies of work, I think. So I'm really excited to hear you discuss it.
Yeah. So it's been a long time coming. We've been working on this for a good while. And I've been like waiting to show this work to a wider audience for a long time. So it's really exciting, and I'm really glad to have this opportunity to do so. I guess like Body of Land, from the beginning, it was really like yourself and Catherine who got in touch with me and Awar and asked us to be involved in this. And I got the opportunity to travel to Kenya in 2000, I think it was May 2018. And I spent a month in Kenya, like hanging out with Awar, meeting other people from Nairobi. Had a great time actually. And when, like the conversations we were having were kind of around like about spirituality and like how we navigate having our own deep spiritual lives with kind of just our regular, being people who have certain ways of seeing the world, and how we express that in ways that are that I guess can be beneficial to others as well, because like you were talking about earlier about holding space for healing as well. But Body of Land, initially, I remember having a dream, and dreams play a massive role in my practice. And I tend to have these really intense, very vivid dreams. It's not often, but when they happen, it usually means that I'm about to make some new work. And I don't make work that references the dreams directly normally, but rather that they just sort of hold something of the feeling of them as well. So what happened with Body of Land was I had this dream probably, like just after I came back from Kenya. I had this dream, and it was just so profound and intense, and I wrote it down in my dream journal, and I kept thinking about it. And there was this motif of red fabric in the dream, and you can see this in the image I'm showing here. I'm going to show the larger image. So can you see that? Yeah. So this is part of my project, which is Body of Land Ritual Manifestations. This part is called a silent gifting. And the whole project kind of happens in stages, because it's like I have the dream, and there's this character in the dream that comes to me with the that has the fabric on, is wearing the fabric. But then in order for me to make the work, I'm then visited by a kind of muse type character, and they're handing over the materials that I'm going to make the work with. And then that becomes the actual work itself. So you can see here the model, who is not me this time. It's a beautiful woman from Scotland called Grace Mark, who's just stunning in these images. And I wanted to kind of create a kind of triptych image that sits in the same space. So she's holding the image in these 3 positions, and it kind of, this darkness behind her, this like void that she kind of is coming through from. I'm thinking about that as being kind of, when you close your eyes and there's just nothing, and maybe something comes forward, like an image comes forward, like maybe during meditation, or when you're in that state between sleeping and waking. And it's that kind of vision. And then the next image is from the next part of the project was called the Oracle, and the Oracle is representing this character that came to me in the dream, and she's holding more objects, and these objects are also part of this this potential ritual. So I'm being kind of guided towards a ritual that may have happened in the past, may be happening in the future, may be continuously happening all the time. I really like the way that the model's hands are kind of again similar to invocation. They're holding these pieces, these things in such still kind of ways, but also clearly presenting them to me as an idea. The model for this work is Arpita Shah, who is an incredible painter, also from Scotland. And yeah, I just really loved making these because I didn't have to be behind and in front of the camera and like try to figure out all the stuff and being stressed out as much in that respect. I kind of got full control of how to make these images. I can talk a wee bit about the objects as well, like the bowl with the red insert. I remember just, again, like, I just thought in my head, it just comes as a kind of random image in my head. I need to get a bowl, okay. Then I go online and I find it, but that came up like straight away. And it had this red color on the inside, and I was just like, whoa, what is that? So, and I love the fact that it's got these kind of Grecian motifs as well. And I'm thinking about the ways that information has been passed from like African ideas and African spiritual practices, then guided through to Europe through the Greeks. So kind of like playing with this idea of histories and mythologies as well. And then the next image in the series is called, well, it's kind of the black aspect, because there's three aspects that I'm kind of playing with: the black aspect, the white aspect, and the red aspect. And they're kind of all kind of elements of the soul, or the full notion of the self. So one is the body, one is the mind, and one is the soul. And this one represents the body, and it's a Shona title again, Nyamayake. So Nyamayake means your flesh. I can stop here and then I can keep going with other ones if you have another question.
No, we can keep going and then we can kind of, round it up.
Okay. The second one is the white aspect, which is Zamani, and Zamani is it's a Swahili word which basically means it's about time, but it's about this type of time that goes on forever, basically eternal time. So that was representing something around the soul or the spirit. And then the final one is the red aspect, which is Mweha, which is breath, which in Shona, which basically is like the energy force that breathes life into the body. So kind of playing with all three of these ideas. And I kept on looking at different cultures. So it was Shona culture, and I was looking at the Luo culture as well. Our Onyango, who's the other artist I was working with for the Body Plan project, she's from Luo background in Kenya. So that's our conversations kind of ended up being around this idea of the trine soul. And then I was looking at like Freud and the id superego and the ego, and how that could potentially, this idea around psychology could also be presented in this way. You see it in Yoruba tradition as well, with the notion of Ori. And yeah, the trine soul is everywhere. It's in Christianity, it's in so many different ideas, but we're all kind of pointing at something similar, not the same, but similar. And I kind of wanted to be able to kind of express that. And because black, red, and white have been in my work for such a long time, I wanted to really fully represent what that might mean for me.
It's really interesting to hear. And yeah, the sort of white, red, and black is recurring in all your images. So it's really nice to see them sort of explored almost in different sort of phases in the new body of land work. I wanted to ask a little bit about the significance of the red and white fabric in two of the images, the one with the chalk and the powder, and also like the red fabric that reoccurs. You mentioned, so body of land and ritual manifestations, you are drawing from African, sort of various African spiritual practices that explore the divine and the spirit world. Do your photographs sort of reference actual photographs or illustrations sort of depicting these traditions, or do you reinterpret them through sort of written accounts or oral histories? Like what, you know, it'd be really, I think for the audience, just to know how, and for me, just to know how these images, do they occur to you in full form in your dreams, or do you sort of draw from various, yeah.
I'll go back to the oracle images, because I think what could be considered a representation of what I saw in the dream would be the oracle.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like that dream was so many things. You know, I was being spoken to by a very specific energy, idea, ancestor, whatever you want to call it. But it came to me with this red fabric, and it was, or she was, because she was gendered in a way, I guess. So there was an understanding that there was a she, and she was both wearing the fabric. She was the fabric. She was a tent. I was inside the tent. It was all these layers. I was looking outside of the tent, looking in, but both at the same time inside the space as well. So it was kind of an interesting space, because I had all these different perspectives at the same time. And then I was given a message as well, and that message then became kind of something that got worked into the project as well. But I'm not going to tell you the message, it's just there. But on top of that, the three aspects kind of present something about how we kind of exist as several things at once. Always there's the body, which we have full control over. We live and inhabit that space. And I found that in Luo culture, they wear feathers in their head when they're doing certain ritual. But then also in Shona culture, my own culture, even though we have lots of distance and we don't have any, I don't know if we have any real connection to each other than being from part of East Africa, you know, Southeast Africa and East Africa. We also wear feathers in our heads for certain rituals. I don't know what those rituals are, because I don't have enough access to my culture. I just take images and I like take things from lots of different places, and I read about them in certain books that are talking about African folklore. So I'm always like just gathering materials, and kind of sometimes it's a very clear vision that's come from a very specific dream, and sometimes it's just a kind of an amalgamation of ideas. And so so then in Yamayake, the reference with the feathers is very specific. And then in Zamani, I guess it's all kind of about what I would perceive the soul would look like in its most like kind of if it was just an extension of the self that goes on forever. And then this was about movement, about adding energy to life. So you don't have life without breath, without mweha. So yeah. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's just that I continuously work with lots of different ideas at once, and I kind of pull them all together into something. And I rarely actually talk about what all of that is. I like to just let the images speak for themselves and let people feel what they feel, and then they can put whatever their ideas are onto it. Yeah.
No, I can see that in the work, because yeah, there's, you know, lots of different elements of Christianity, and then certain sort of African spiritual imagery, Hinduism, and I think it's really interesting, yeah, that you leave it really open to the viewer to kind of interpret as they wish, but it means, you know, something different to you or similar, but it's all essentially looking at these really important elements of life and death and cycle, which all, you know, humans and religions sort of explore. So it's really beautiful. I'm keeping an eye on the time because we've got some the folks that haven't started putting questions through. We've got a few. We're going to attempt to answer not all of them, unfortunately, because of the time, but there's a few coming through. So I'm going to read a few out.
Should I stop sharing the screen?
Pardon? Yeah, let's do that. Yes. So I'll start. So there's a question from Leah Apostrophe, where she says, very beautiful work. When it comes to your creative process, does it primarily involve sketching the different elements and or colors within the image and then incorporate within photography practice? Or do you experiment with the visual quality of the camera straight on, or a bit of both? So
I never sketch anything at all in my work. There's been work that I've made recently for the Divine Sky project that I've made that just recently got shown at Stills online. That series was all about drawing, and I actually did a lot of drawing for Body of Land when I was in Kenya, but I don't sketch what the image is going to look like. I sketch, I almost doodle and just allow kind of through automatic writing, and I kind of think through ideas as I draw, but I don't draw the body and the objects or anything like that. That just doesn't happen. I hold an image in my head, and I keep it in my head for sometimes years. Machache was in my head for 5 years before I finally made it.
And then you just create it. So it's less about sketching, but just that still, and then creating it on sort of in the studio in front of the camera. Great, thank you for that question, Leah. There's another one, I'm not sure who it's from, but it's a Sekai. You've talked about the synergy between yourself and Awar, but are residencies a good way of supporting artists' practice? Will it lead to an ongoing dialogue?
I think it can do. You know, we're quite lucky that like when we first initially started talking, Awar and I have like a lot of kind of things in common with regards to like how we see the world, and so we got talking quite quickly about things that we just found interesting. We did more just general chats with each other about things than we did like kind of drilling down into like research, because I research in the way I do and Awar researches in the way that she does, and we work in very different ways. Even though we make work that kind of quite clearly has similar concerns. So yeah, I think it can work, and obviously I'm still in contact with Awar every day. We're not finished this project, but I hope that in the future we'll just keep on kind of chatting and potentially working together in the future. I feel that for me, collaboration is like a huge thing. So I like to work with people a lot. I mean, the model for the oracle images at the Bisola, she's someone who I've curated a show for. I've worked with on other projects. We're always talking about working together. So I think keeping good, strong, collaborative relationships is great. And residencies are a great space for that, you know, because they just bring a lot of artists together, or bring a few artists together and let them bounce ideas off each other.
That's true. And residencies are great in terms of getting you sometimes out of working from home or your own studio and getting to a new space. You get challenged in new ways. So that's always going to nurture your practice. Even, you know, if you don't produce a full body of work, it's always that experience, always, I think, enriches your practice, meeting other artists. There's the next one. So it's more of a comment and a question from Gwendolina Rota. She says, I see poetry, love, beauty, and life in it. I love it so much, which is really lovely. I wonder which series she's talking about, but that's really, thank you for that. Gwendolina. Okay, a question from Gwen McLeod. Can I ask Sekai if the process of braiding in itself was therapeutic and helped in dealing with grief? Does the work still hold a grieving process for you? It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, the braiding was just so many things. Like, I spent such a long time working on it. I was braiding before my dad passed, but then it kind of was what allowed me to keep working, because I'd already been, like, I had muscle memory from doing all this braiding for a year, and it kind of almost like gave me that little bit of a push to get on with something. And also just, it's just something that we do. And, you know, like, Black people braid hair, and especially Black women, we love to work with our hair. I twist my hair like once or twice a week. So it's something that's just part of who I am, and it is very, very therapeutic. And so, yeah, and I think that the Musoro, to this day, I still feel a certain energy of it. It's like, it really helped me to process, and I still feel like it's doing that work. Every time I look at those images, I still feel like, wow, I actually got up and did that, even as I was feeling that way.
Thank you. So there's another question from Camilla Cavalanti, saying, fantastic work. I love the new series, Body of Land series. Your black, white, and red elements are shown organically, depicting movement and action, as opposed to the stillness of other images in Body of Land. Can you expand a little bit more on this?
Yeah, I think the stillness in the other images in Body of Land are kind of, it's almost like preparatory. It's like I'm preparing to make the work, and then the work is the movement, and it's like I'm representing the mind, the body, and the spirit, and how it functions. And so they're all constantly in movement. As you're alive, like, you're in motion at all times, and every single moment is like part of that movement. Whereas, like, the oracle is just here to present the idea, and in a silent gifting, the muse is just there to present the objects. So, you know, it's almost like, yeah, those stages have to kind of express themselves in different ways. So that, I think that's why there's stillness in some and movement in others.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, yes, and then we've got a concluding question, I think. I don't think any more are coming through. So, oh no, there's one just come through before I conclude. From Malcolm, where he asks, there is a cross-media element to your practice, performance, painting. Is there something about photographer that brings that together and embraces the political in a more concise way?
Yeah, I think sorry?
That's a loaded question, Malcolm.
I think yeah, it's interesting, because I never used to consider myself a photographer, despite the fact I was always making work with the camera. For me, like I said before, my work was painting, so I was always trying to create a painterly image, and then the photograph became something else and gave me so much more scope to do lots of different things. It can document a performance, or it can be the actual work, and it kind of does both in my work a lot of the time. So yeah, the idea of brings that together and embraces the political in a more concise way. I don't know, I feel like it's just the lived experience of being an artist, and being, again, like, being a Black woman artist. The people I looked to when I was studying were multidisciplinary artists. Ongeshi Mutu, Kerry James Marshall, Yinka Shawnee Barry, Kahinda White, they all do many, many different things. And so I always felt like that was who I am as an artist. I wanted to be able to show, to maybe not necessarily show the work as being multidisciplinary, but the process is multidisciplinary. Like, my other work at the Divine Sky Project has been all about painting on fabric, and it's a completely different thing to Body of Land, but they kind of almost work in the same ways, and they are all very political because the person is political.
Thank you. I think there's one more question, and then I think we'll conclude. But there's been a question if there will be a body of land publication. Yes, there will be. We've been working with Alistair Dimmick, who's been designing the book for the past couple of years, with essays by her director, Catherine Pahar. We've got Tiffany Boyle, who is from Mother Tongue, that wrote about Sekai's new body of work, and Kampire Behahi, who's a Ugandan-based artist and DJ, who wrote about Hawar's work. So the publication will be sort of coordinated and be released during the exhibition next year. So look out for that. Just wanted to thank you Street Level for organising this talk, and Sekai especially for being so open and honest about your really powerful work. I think I've really enjoyed hearing you talk about it. Yeah, just wanted to thank everyone for sharing and asking such interesting questions. Sekai, is there any?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much to Street Level for giving us a space to finally share the work, and amazing questions from you, Arpita. I was like looking through them for the last couple of days, and I was like, you know what, these are really, really good questions. And thanks to the people who asked questions as well on the Facebook live stream. So yeah, thank you to everyone. And yeah.
Have a good week, everyone, and thanks again. Look out for more Street Level events. I think something's coming up next week, so I'm sure it'll get shared on Street Level's Facebook. And yeah, look out for more information on the Body of Land exhibition on Street Level's site. So thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Thank you, Sekai.
Bye.
Bye.